The Indiana Hoosiers continue to crush it in the transfer portal. And let me say this, the college basketball world's starting to take notice.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome into this, the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your man, Jacob Goins. Appreciate you being here, making this your first listen each and every day. Shout out to all the everydayers, those of you that truly make this your first listen each and every day, part of your rotation. We are, of course, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Look, I have to admit, I've got a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store and Google Play. Well, for those of you on video, you've noticed it already, but if you're on the audio, joined today by a good friend of mine, Andy Patton, who is with the co-host of Locked On College Basketball, the daily college basketball show, a part of our Locked On Podcast Network. Andy, it's so great to have you back on the show, man. I know it's been busy. There's so much happening in the world of college basketball right now.
Always love coming on, man. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking about the fun couple of additions here for this Indiana basketball team.
Well, that's why we bring you on, is because I want to get the outside perspective on what Indiana has been doing coming out of the season into the off season. It was not a good year last year for this Indiana team. I don't think that's a secret to anybody. And I've continued to tell people that Mike Woodson's job relied on his transfer portal success, and they have taken that mentality and ran with it because they now have the number one transfer portal class in the country, thanks to Oumar Ballo, Myles Rice, and Kanaan Carlyle. Man, tell us your thoughts about what the Hoosiers have done here lately in the transfer portal.
3 incredibly talented additions. It's clear Mike Woodson was spending some time out west, guys coming from Arizona, from Stanford, from Washington State. He loved that West Coast basketball, decided he wanted to get in on the action. 3 really talented players. I don't think there's any debate at all that if you just look at a numbers perspective, the rankings that we've seen on like Evan Mia's website or various other places that rank transfers, you're seeing Oumar Ballo in the top overall at Evan Mia's side, other places, top 5, top 10, Carlyle, Rice, those guys are all top 25-ish transfers. So Mike Woodson went out and said, I'm going to go get the best players that I can bring to Bloomington. And I think you looked at last year, they weren't really able to make any guard additions because of the guards they had coming back. Those guys didn't perform as well as expected. And so this year, I think you're absolutely right. Woodson needed to go out and get new guards that fit his system that he thought was going to help elevate this program. I think all 3 of these players are very talented. I will say that I am skeptical about the fit, specifically the fact that there's not a lot of shooters that are coming in here. Neither Rice or Carlyle are particularly good three-point shooters. Oumar Ballo will never attempt a three-pointer, or he certainly should not attempt a three-pointer. That's not his game. That's not why he's here. That's fine. But I do wonder how this is all going to fit. I think that the talent that Indiana has added this offseason is greater than the talent out the door, even with guys like Kel'el Ware going to the NBA, things like that. And I think that there is a way that these pieces fit together really well. But I'm squinting to see it right now. There's obviously still more to be done in this offseason, potentially some more moves to be had. But I think it's a lot of talent. I'm just not sure how it's all going to fit together.
And, you know, I think that's a fair thing to say and a fair feeling to have, because in this whole transfer portal era that we're still in just the beginning years of, I mean, you've seen some guys really work out and you've seen some that have been complete flops and it doesn't work and it's a complete total disaster. And so that is what I feel a lot of Indiana fans and I hear on my show on Locked On Hoosiers all the time is okay, well, you've gotten all the guys. Now, how does it all fit together? And you bring in Oumar Ballo, a 7-footer, to replace a 7-footer, plus the 2 guards and Myles Rice and Kanaan Carlyle. Which one of those is your favorite? Which one do you think fits the Indiana system the best coming into this next season for Mike Woodson?
I'm a big Myles Rice fan. Myles Rice had a great year. Obviously, he was coming off of significant health issues. For him to even have been able to play last year, put up 15 points per game in the Pac-12 for a team that incredibly exceeded expectations. I'm also a huge believer in Kyle Smith as a coach. And I think he did a lot of great things to help elevate Rice's game, to help elevate that entire team's game in ways where, we saw him have that breakout season and do the things that he did. And I'm really excited to see what he does at Indiana. I think he's a great Big Ten player. I think he fits the conference. I think he's tough-nosed. He's physical. He's 6'2". He's not super big, but he's got a decent amount of size on him. He's hell-bent on attacking the rim. He's very good at that. The three-point shot isn't really there, but 27.5% was obviously not good at that last year, but he did shoot 81% from the free throw line. I do think there's some optimism that maybe some more outside shooting could be in the cards for him in an offense where he's going to need to be able to space the floor with Ballo in there, with Mbako in there. Like you're going to need to be able to space with Renault in there as well. You're going to need to be able to space the floor. And I think if Myles Rice can get open looks, he's maybe not a 40% three-point shooter. I don't think he's taking that jump. But if he's 35 while averaging something around 14, 15 points per game, you could be talking about a Big Ten third team, Big Ten second team potentially. I think Ballo is the biggest name and certainly has had the most success in his career. I think he's going to continue to do what Ballo has done. I think you look at the numbers he's put up in Arizona, you expect that's probably what he's going to do at Indiana. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. He's been a highly efficient scorer on the block, 65-ish% on two-pointers for most of his career. He's a decent rim protector. He's not an elite shot blocker, but he uses his size well enough to alter shots. I think you're going to want that certainly in the Big Ten. But Rice is the guy I'm most excited about. That's not to say anything negative about Carlyle. I think he's fantastic as well. Just a little less proven and a lot younger. So I'm curious what that transition looks like for him coming into the Big Ten. But there's a lot to be excited about in my mind, particularly with Myles Rice.
Was there a little hesitancy there with Oumar Ballo there, Andy? Are we not fully feeling what he's bringing to the table? Maybe not necessarily in the Indiana scope, but just Ballo as a player individually?
I thought he was overranked. I was surprised to see him. And I use Evan Miyakawa's website a lot. And it's database. It's not an opinion by any stretch. But right. I was surprised to see Ballo so high. I think his post defense, maybe he's getting more credit for that than I think that he should. I just seen a lot of him getting pushed around, a lot of him getting bodied by guys who are smaller than him. I worry about what that might do in the Big Ten, where you face a lot of bigger guys. The Pac-12 didn't have as much depth in the front court. And when he played big players, go watch his games against Oregon and N'Faly Dante. Like, he got pushed around badly. And N'Faly Dante is very, very good. So it's not a huge insult to him necessarily, but you've seen him kind of get bodied around by guys who are around his size. And I'm skeptical a little bit about what that might look like for him in the Big Ten at Indiana. I think he's going to be solid. I think he's going to be quality. He's been highly productive for multiple years now, but when I'm seeing him he's going to replace Bacot at North Carolina, I was like, okay, let's pump the brakes. I don't think he's quite that level, but I think he's a perfectly fine fit for Indiana.
Yeah. And, trying to make those types of comparisons is a little extreme anyway. And look, he's the number one ranked player in the portal. And like you said, that can be debated, surely. But the fact that Indiana went and got him, I think is a huge accomplishment. Plus Myles Rice, plus Carlyle, again, gives you that number one ranked class in the country as of right now. And I don't think the Hoosiers are done. I think they're going to help and get guys to elevate that three-point shooting game that you mentioned, because believe me, if you're talking about it, Hoosiers fans are talking about it as well. It's a big concern here in Bloomington. And so as we move forward, I want to talk about the Big Ten a little bit. We'll talk about that coming up, about what's happening around this conference, because the Indiana Hoosiers have been doing well in the portal, but they're not alone around this Big Ten that is looking different now than it ever has before. I keep having to remind myself of that. We'll talk about that coming up next on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. I've told you the NBA and NHL playoffs are my favorite. I love it. It's happening every single night. Games across the board. Why not sit there on the couch with FanDuel open on your phone and have even more fun? Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. So you may as well try it out. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on the app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back into Locked On Hoosiers. Appreciate you being here, making this your go-to spot for all things Indiana athletics. If you're on the video version, be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We just surpassed 2,300 subscribers. We're well on our way to 2,400, so thank you so much for doing that. If you're on audio, be sure you follow us there, turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of Locked On Hoosiers. We're joined today by Patton from the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and that's what we're talking is all things college basketball. And want to talk about the Big Ten and then kind of where Indiana stands in there right now through this whole transfer portal cycle, season, whatever word you want to use for it. Other teams in your mind, Andy, and there's one that I have in particular that I want to talk about, but other teams around the conference that have kind of made a splash so far in this portal cycle in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan definitely stands out recently in the last, literally couple of days as we're recording right now for some of the additions that they have made. They made some headlines for the third year in a row for a player they were not able to add because of an admissions issue. That was John L. Davis from FAU, who would have been following his coach, Dusty May. Of course, John L. Davis, one of the best players available in the portal, and he is still available as of right now because he was unable to get accepted to Michigan, just like Terrence Shannon Jr. 2 years ago, just like Caleb Love last year. But Michigan and Dusty May were kind of able to make sure that didn't become a huge headline because they go out, they get somebody like Roddy Gale, they go get a Trey Donaldson from Auburn, they get Danny Wolf from Yale, like a lot of big time additions going on there. And I mentioned Roddy Gale from Ohio State. I'm also been really impressed by what the Buckeyes have been able to do. They fire their coach, Chris Holtmann. They bring in Jake Diebler. They basically just promote him after a strong finish to the season. He's made some great additions for that program as well. So those are two teams that kind of stand out to me as early kind of winners in the transfer portal, alongside, of course, Indiana, as those three schools have made some big moves so far.
Yeah, the Michigan situation is really interesting to me because you look at that and you mentioned it. This is not the first time they've had this problem. And we know that Michigan is a prestigious university on the academic side of things on top of the athletics. But man, I mean, that has hurt them numerous times. And not that the basketball is more important than the academics, but on that side of things, like at what point does a Michigan coach have to step in and be like, man, you're hurting me. Like I got to go get my guys and get my players and try to compete in a new look Big Ten. I mean, this is an ongoing problem up there in Ann Arbor.
I'm really curious how Dusty May will handle it because Dusty May came from a mid-major background. I'm not going to pretend to have a lot of knowledge on FAU's academic situation. I don't, but mid-majors tend to be more academic over athletic focused, just historically. And so I think he may have more kind of comfortability navigating a school where that is something that is just more of an issue. It's not as big of an issue in other schools in the Big Ten. Not saying they don't care about their athletics. It's just different the way that Michigan treats it. Juwan Howard seems to really struggle with that. And I don't think Dusty May will. What we know about John L. Davis is that he spent 4 years at FAU and he didn't graduate. That doesn't necessarily mean anything terrible, but that's a situation where it's a little bit harder to transfer to a school where you're not grad transferring. If John L. Davis had graduated, it might have been able to work a little bit more in their favor. So I think if you're Dusty May, like you can't always just poach the Ivy League, although they did do that by bringing in Danny Wolf from Yale. You kind of got to assume if Michigan can't get a kid from Yale in, then you're going to have some serious problems. But I do think May's going to be able to navigate it better than Howard would have, just because he has experience coming from the mid-major level, where I suspect that he's at least more familiar with what potential hurdles might come up in the transferring process.
I mentioned this earlier, that the new look Big Ten that I keep having to remind myself of. You see news about USC and UCLA, and it's like, oh, that's the Pac-12. I don't care. No, it's not. It's now the Big Ten because of the Pac-12 crumbling. And a lot of people have said that Indiana has benefited from that. And I think you're probably right, because we got 3 Pac-12 players coming to Bloomington. But man, that's just a new look thing that we're going to have to get used to, right, Andy? USC, UCLA, more teams in the future coming to this conference as it continues to grow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, USC is a program in a unique spot, as obviously their coach, Andy Enfield, goes to SMU, and then they bring in Eric Musselman and
chain reaction.
Yeah, the big chain reaction that leads to John Calipari leaving, that leads to Mark Pope going to Kentucky, all sorts of chaos stemming from Rob Lanier getting fired at SMU. Very weird coaching carousel. That's what makes college basketball so fun. But yeah, USC moving to the Big Ten, new coach who's done a ton of transfer recruiting in the past. Did not go well last year at Arkansas, but I think that Muss is going to do some really nice things for USC in the future. Mick Cronin's team, complete disaster at UCLA last year. No chance they're as bad this year, but I'm very intrigued by what that move is going to look like for them. Washington's got a new coach, Danny Sprinkle, replacing Mike Hopkins. Oregon had just found out Kwame Evans is coming back. He was a guy who many thought could be a first-round pick this year. So a lot of intrigue, a lot of excitement. As somebody who lives on the West Coast, I'm sad to see these programs no longer in the Pac-12. I'm still wrapping my head around it, but there's going to be some good basketball coming into the Big Ten, and I'm really excited to see how that shakes out.
With Indiana's current roster, I want to get your thoughts on this as we wrap up the segment about the Big Ten. As of right now, late April, I know it's tough. I know there's still portal additions and subtractions moving all over the place, and the season doesn't start for another 5 months. But if you had to place the Indiana roster talent-wise somewhere in the Big Ten rankings-wise, where's about where you would put it based off of what is coming back, what they lost, but also what's coming in through the transfer portal and also with Bryson Tucker, the 5-star commit?
Yeah, probably right around the top 5. Again, it's obviously early to be doing that right now. I'm still skeptical of Michigan because they've lost a lot of players. Purdue's tough to pin down. They were not just Zach Edey last year, but that's still a massive, literally and figuratively, loss for the Purdue Boilermakers. So they kind of get bumped a few spots. Michigan State lost enough talent. They added their first transfer in 3 years, but they haven't done enough else other than that. For them, it's a lot of like, how many of those freshmen are going to take sophomore leaps? That's what they need. Wisconsin's been gutted by the portal, so they're kind of down. Northwestern, I'm not quite ready to put them up there. I don't think any of the 4 newcomers are obviously better than Indiana right now from a roster perspective. Again, USC's roster last year would have been better, but they significantly underperformed. So to me, I think they're probably in that 3-4 range roster wise, but a lot of these rosters aren't done, obviously. And again, like we said at the top, the roster's great, but how is the construction going to go? How are all the pieces going to fit together? If Mike Woodson's team is just a bunch of non-shooters and the everything's packed in the middle and Ballo can't operate, it doesn't really matter how talented the team is. That's not going to work. So I think that's still the big question that needs to be answered. But talent-wise, this is a very good Big Ten team right now.
We'll see how it goes. Indiana with the transfer portal, other teams around the Big Ten. So much more to happen around that. But when we come back, I want to talk about college basketball. Some of the biggest storylines over the last couple of weeks. Calipari to Arkansas, the whole chain reaction we just talked about, and kids transferring from one school to their biggest rival. I mean, it's becoming a trend right now, Andy, in college basketball. We'll talk about that coming up in our final segment on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Look, we've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies, or in my situation, my family as well. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Change other players' rent for your iconic properties. Look, you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb in the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or on Google Play. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I tell you all the time, this is my go-to ticketing app. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, and I can personally tell you that is the truth. I've done this numerous times. I've made last-second decisions to go to concerts, go to comedy shows, and when I say last minute, I mean within the last 45 minutes before it starts. And the ticket prices are phenomenal. And they were available. The views from your seat is my favorite part of Game Time. It truly is the go-to ticketing app. With last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And they're all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Final segment here on Locked On Hoosiers. Appreciate you being here, making this your first listen each and every day. Reminder, no matter if you're on audio, video, I don't care how you find it, we are always free and available and never behind a paywall. We're joined by Andy Patton from the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Be sure you go and check that out. Make that a part of your daily rotation each and every day. Him and Isaac Shea do a fantastic job covering all the latest news in college basketball, which is where we go now, Andy. And I'm going to leave this open to you, my friend. There have been so many major storylines in the last 2 weeks alone that it'll carry us through the rest of the offseason all the way to November, man.
Yeah, it's been insane. I mean, for everything that happened with the Kentucky and Arkansas jobs right around the national championship game, like we're talking, Danny Hurley's getting interviewed after winning back-to-back championships about whether he's going to take the Kentucky job, because that is how impactful Kentucky's job opening is. It's just a seismic landscape shift in college basketball whenever Kentucky has a job opening. It has been resolved. Mark Pope, of course, moving over there. That has been the biggest storyline so far this offseason. And I think, first of all, I actually am a believer in Mark Pope at Kentucky. I don't think it's going to turn things around right away. Okay. But things were stagnant with John Calipari. Like they were getting good recruits and they weren't winning. 5 years is a long enough time of not having NCAA tournament success, especially at a school like Kentucky, where I think you're like, okay, we got to turn the page. And obviously they didn't fire Calipari. He left to take the job at Arkansas. It's kind of semantics, but it helps them out financially. But I like Mark Pope as a coach. I've seen a lot of him from his time at BYU, even from his time at Utah Valley. I think he's going to, with the right resources, with more NIL money, recruiting at people are like, well, he didn't recruit very well at BYU. Do you know how hard it is to recruit at BYU? Like, it's a really significant challenge. It's a high resource institution, but they've only just now been in the Big 12. They were in the WCC previously. It's harder to convince kids to come to a school with the kind of restrictions that they have to play in the WCC. The fact that they got any talent was impressive. And now he has basically a blank checkbook of NIL funds at Kentucky. He's going to be able to get a ton of good players. I think the main thing you want at Kentucky is somebody who, understands the pressure, what it means to be the lead person in Lexington. Mark Pope understands that. He was a team captain, led this team to a championship in 1996, and who wants to be there. And Jake Hatch, the host of Locked On Cougars, the BYU show, he said it perfectly when we talked to him. He said, Mark Pope would crawl through glass to coach at Kentucky. And I think that that's true. And I think if nothing else, he's also a good X's and O's coach, which helps. But you want somebody who's really passionate about your program. And Mark Pope is that. So I'm excited about this for Kentucky. I don't think they're going to be great right away, but I think that it's going to work out well for them in the long run. But I think one of the other big stories is the amount of high profile programs where their rosters are gone. Depleted. I mean, Kentucky doesn't have a roster. Arkansas doesn't have a roster. Duke had 7 players enter the transfer portal. We're looking at these teams that are just decimated. And it's when you're in the thick of it, the way we are just talking about it every single day on the show, you kind of have to step back and be like, imagine telling somebody 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 15 years ago, Duke went to the Sweet 16 and then their entire team left after the year. That's just such an insane thing that is now just borderline commonplace of these rosters are just turning around in these huge ways. And I'm excited about what Duke's going to be able to do because they're just building around Cooper Flagg. And I think they're going to still be great next year. But it's fascinating to look at the landscape of college basketball and see these teams that are just completely turning over 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys year after year.
It's the new norm. I mean, it really is. It's the new normal. And for college football coaches, basketball, I mean, any sport in college now, that's the new normal. And here's the thing with basketball, and I don't have to tell you this, is when one person leaves, depending on how good and how, just talented they were, that's more impactful in basketball than almost any other sport because, I mean, you play 5-on-5 and most teams don't go deeper than 8 on their bench. And this isn't like a linebacker leaving in football where, well, all right, that hurt. That kind of sucks, but that's all right. We've got others to fill the space. If your starting point guard leaves, you're like, oh, we got to go find another starting point guard. And that's what so many of these teams are dealing with right now in this transfer portal era. Something else that's happening that's got fans all sorts of riled up, and I mentioned it in our tease at the end of the second segment. We've got players leaving major programs to go to their biggest rival, Ohio State to Michigan, Auburn to Alabama. I mean, things that never even thought were possible 5 or 10 years ago, Andy, they're now becoming, again, the norm in college basketball, really, but college sports in general.
Yeah, it's been just interconference transfers used to be a lot more rare, and now it's exceedingly common to see that happen. I one of the other shows I host is Locked On Zags podcast, and when a couple of players from the WCC entered the transfer portal, including Michael Ajayi from Pepperdine, and I thought, well, Gonzaga's never recruited a player from another WCC school, even though he's a good fit. There's no way. A week later, he committed, and it's like, oh, that's just happening now. Like that's just a thing that you see players go from like you said, Ohio State to Michigan in the Roddy Gale situation. Like that's just Aiden Holloway going from Auburn to Alabama. Like we're not used to that, and it's still it's jarring to see that happen. It's going to be weird to see these players in different lineups on different teams next year. I know that some Wisconsin fans are very concerned that Chucky Hepburn's going to find himself somewhere else in the Big Ten. Maybe he's going to follow his former teammate Frankie Fiddler, who's now at Michigan State. If Chucky Hepburn goes to Michigan State, that's another move in the conference where I'm sure that Wisconsin fans are not going to love seeing Chucky wearing green, but that's just what's happening these days. And a lot of it's bag chasing. There's some financial elements to it. I think until we have some level of understanding of what this money is, we're hearing huge numbers. I mean, Ballo, I'm sure you heard the numbers thrown around with him, 1.2. Like I'm kind of skeptical to believe any of the numbers that we see unless they're actually like contracts. And when we get to the point where college athletics is somehow regulated with contracts or something instead of just being the complete wild, wild west, I think we're going to eventually have some of this stuff slow down a little bit. But for right now, I mean, it is as unregulated as it will ever be. And I do think eventually, maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, we're going to look at this period of time and be like, what in the heck was going on? Because I don't think college basketball is sustainable long-term with guys flipping to rivals every year and 6 or 7 players leaving prestigious programs every year. It's just not, that can't continue. And I don't know what's going to change. I don't know who's going to change it. The NCAA doesn't seem particularly concerned with doing anything. So somebody's eventually going to have to change this. But I think eventually we'll look back on this era and be like, wow, that was chaos.
Well said, my friend. And I agree with everything. And the NCAA is no help. And unfortunately, I think they're going to have to not even be in the picture anymore for something else to happen. I mean, I think that's where we're heading, really. And that's kind of sad, but it's the norm. It is what it is, and it's where we are in college athletics, but particularly what we're talking about in college basketball. So Andy Patton, host of Locked On College Basketball, man, tell the people where they can find it, what you guys are covering day to day, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, Locked On College Basketball. You can find it on Twitter at Locked On CBB. You can find me on Twitter, Andy Patton, CBB. The show is available wherever you're listening to Locked On Hoosiers. You can find Locked On College Basketball there as well on YouTube, on your favorite podcast platform. We're mostly just covering the transfer portal right now. It's day-to-day stuff. We talked a lot about the Kentucky coaching search, of course, everything going on there. We're going to talk about the ranking of some head coaches, some new head coaches. We're going to be doing that, talking portal, talking NBA draft stuff as we're now getting closer and closer to the deadline for that as well. But one of the nice things about there not really being a college basketball offseason anymore is that there's plenty to talk about on our show. So definitely check it out. Hit that subscribe button. Hang out with us 5 days a week because we got plenty to discuss every single day.
There is always something to talk about in the game of college basketball nowadays, which makes our job so much fun, Andy. I appreciate you, man. It's always a blast catching up with you. Hoosier fans, if you're still here, appreciate you being here. Like the video, subscribe to our channel. Be sure if you're on audio, thank y'all so much as well. You can follow on any platform that you're on. Hit the notification so you never miss a new episode of Locked On Hoosiers. We've got some NBA draft conversation we need to talk about with Khalil Ware coming up this week, and I think more portal news is coming, so be sure you're tuned in right here on Locked On Hoosiers. Until next time, Hoosier fans, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.